Joining us now is Nabila Ramdani, who is a journalist, joining us to speak to us, a French journalist, joining to speak to us about the recent ruling made by the European Court of Justice that a woman wearing a headscarf at work, a Muslim headscarf, the hijab, could lose her job if somebody else in the office felt that her wearing of a headscarf was causing some form of conflict or offending them in some way. Of course, we were talking about this yesterday on air as well. Nabila, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon, Majid. Thank you for having me.
Coming from a British Muslim perspective, this ruling is shocking. It conjures up images of deep discrimination, anti-Muslim bigotry. Of course, one could, here in Britain, easily conceive of an office in which there's no uniform, such as here at Global, where people wear what they like at work. A headscarfed lady could be working here. And, of course, I say again, they are always welcome to apply, and I'll make sure they have a fair hearing. And then suddenly somebody could say, your headscarf's making me uncomfortable, and she could lose her job over that. Is this ruling really saying that?
Well, this is actually a reaffirmation of a law that has been widely observed across the EU for some time. And as such, it is not in itself hugely controversial. It effectively means that private employers in the EU can continue to ban people from wearing religious symbols and indeed political ones in order to present an image of neutrality. Some might argue that headscarves are not actually a religious symbol, but companies can continue to ban them provided they can prove it is all part of a policy against all religious and political symbols. So in this sense, this kind of law is never clear-cut. For example, there are plenty of secular workers who might argue that the headscarf they wear is non-religious and is non-political, which means that all cases will have to be considered on their merits and waste a lot of court time. And I might suggest this is all a bit pointless, considering a headscarf is in itself harmless. Now, there are already some voices who have been arguing that this EU ruling is a clear violation of religious freedoms and it would exacerbate prejudices against Muslim women in Europe. It is already perceived by some as a sign of rising Islamophobia at a time when Muslim women in Europe are being subjected to increasing discrimination for their religious beliefs. And this ruling has also been criticized as it could create a basis and indeed legal cover for discrimination, and as such is seen as an attempt to grant legitimacy to racism. Having said all that, I have to say that what this European court decision does not sound like to me is the kind of vehement attack on Islam that you get in France under the guise of an argument about clothes, because it involves private companies making private decisions. So in this sense, the EU ruling is not really comparable with the situation in countries like France.
What is the situation in France then?
Well, you have a situation where debates about the veil are used as a political weapon. It's very common in France for arguments about headscarves to be conflated with much wider and indeed more loaded issues about people who are considered to be immigrant newcomers. That is to say that people are not really bothered too much about the headscarf in itself. They just see arguments about it as a good way to attack Muslims. And in this sense, the principle of secularism in France is routinely weaponized to ban Muslim women who wear headscarves from pretty much all aspects of life, from accompanying children on school trips to entering politics. And so concentrating on what women wear in France is a classic tactic used by politicians across the political spectrum, from the far-right rabble-rousers like the Le Pen dynasty to nominally liberal centrists like Macron, to scapegoat marginalized communities linked to France's former empire, because they are considered foreign and they are portrayed as an underclass that presents a threat to society. And that's poisoning politicking that allows those drawn to small-town bigotry to find an outlet for the hatred, to put it bluntly.
Now, you're a French-Algerian journalist, so you have a foot in both worlds. You're intimately familiar with both worlds. When we discussed this on air yesterday, and I took the view that I believe that this would lead to more discrimination and more anti-Muslim bigotry in France and across Europe, we had a French caller call on to try and explain to me the French perspective on secularism, and they were talking, of course, of the doctrine of laïcité. Now, they said that the entire French struggle of secularism is defined by this desire to remove religion from the public sphere. But be that as it may, somebody who is, I imagine, far more intimately familiar with this debate than most, how do you then say, what should France do going forward? How does it address this core issue? Because it does point to a deeper philosophical problem with regards to how the French view secularism versus how we do here in Britain.
Well, laïcité, or the concept of secularism, perfectly allows the expression of religious belief. And so it is disingenuously distorted by the political class with an agenda, and is often used as a textbook excuse by politicians with far more venal reasons to be seen to be doing something about Muslims. And the latest example of that is President Emmanuel Macron's much vaunted clampdown against what he called Islamist separatism. So this new legislation applies mainly to Muslims who live on council estates, and the focus is on increased security and monitoring, especially of those who identify themselves to be Muslim by wearing hijabs or similar. Now, such initiatives are not normally associated with the Rassemblement National, the National Rally, the current name for the dynastic National Front, which is now led by Marine Le Pen, Jean-Marie Le Pen's daughter. And she's likely to go head-to-head with Macron in presidential election next year, just as she did in 2017. Now, the National Rally was still called the National Front then, and it remains widely supported by racists, anti-Semites, and of course, Islamophobes. Now, that Macron, who came to power as a liberal centrist, apparently committed to tolerance and respect, has now seemingly joined them in this obsession with Islamic dress. I think it should concern anyone who is worried about the fragmentation of the French Republic, and especially its increasing despicable treatment of ethnic and religious minorities.
Okay. Nabila Ramdani, we're going to have to end it, but thank you very much for joining us.